Welcome, everybody. This is the capstone version of the Roxborough House Roundtables, the All Inspector Center. My name is Evan Lane. I'm Director of Law and Society, and this is part of the capstone project through Sabria and Nick, who will be introducing themselves. We are being recorded, and this will be posted on YouTube and SoundCloud, and will be circulated throughout the university for you guys to watch. The way it will work is we have an inner circle, which Nick and Sabria will introduce. But anyone could ask a question, even if you're not in the inner circle. The best way to do that is to use an electronic hand wave, or you can use the chat, and I will go in whenever I can to ask that question. So with that, I'm very excited to hear this capstone. I turn it over to my students.
Good evening, my name is Sabria. Good evening, my name is Sabria Lytes. I'm a senior captain on our women's basketball team. I'm also a senior in our Law and Society program, and thank you for joining our panel today.
Hi, I'm Nick Franchi, also a senior in the Law and Society program and a senior on our men's golf team here at Jefferson. And I'd just like to thank everyone for coming tonight. So obviously this will be recorded, and we're going to be able to put this towards a project that we've been working on. I would hope that everyone would feel free to, participate, ask questions, and get involved in this conversation that we all find very important to ourselves.
Coach?
I'm Shirley, Assistant Vice President for Athletics, Head Coach Women's Basketball. I've been at the school for 33 years, and I get the good fortune of coaching Sabria.
And Dr. Rieder?
Hi, I'm Dr. Rieder. I'm an assistant professor in psychology here at Jefferson, and I've been at Jefferson coming on 2 years, and I've really enjoyed my time here and interactions with students so far.
Right, Nick?
And we also have Coach Nick Nguyen from the men's golf team here. He's also a member of our panel. Nick, if you want to go ahead.
Good evening, everybody. My name's Nick Nguyen, as Nick introduced myself. I'm an assistant men's golf team coach here at Jefferson. Graduate also of Jefferson, also a member of the men's golf team in 2018. So this is my third year of coaching Nick as a player, and I also had the joy of playing with him for 1 year, my senior year. So good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Okay, so we're actually going to start. Good evening and welcome to tonight's roundtable. This will be recorded and posted to our website. For the members of the panel, as this discussion carries on, we ask that everyone remains muted and uses the raise hand function until called on. Feel free to raise your hand whenever you feel like it. For the spectators not on the panel, please utilize the chat function to ask questions, or you can also raise your hand and Professor Lane will call on you or ask the question on your behalf.
So for our law capstone, which is obviously why we're all here, Sabria and I began this project nearly 3 months ago with an idea that came from our own experiences and our own frustrations over the last year. Obviously, the last year has been filled with difficulty, stress, sadness, and more, as the COVID-19 pandemic has affected everyone throughout this world, and definitely here in the Jefferson University community. We've seen the transformation of society throughout several aspects of life, everything from shopping to work, and obviously to athletics and school. So that last piece is the big focal point of our work. And as athletes, we obviously lost our sports for nearly a year. Last March, the winter playoff runs ended without games being played, and the spring season never even got off the ground. In the year to follow, athletes around the globe and here at Jefferson continued to miss out on precious time. And it is those Jefferson University student athletes that we spoke with to drive this conversation of the effects of COVID-19 on college-age athletes forward. Through friends, teammates, coaches, and more, we were able to hear a bunch of different stories and different experiences of those affected and how it affected them. And we hope to continue that tonight through this conversation with this very varied group of unique perspectives and important individuals in the Jefferson community.
With us today is a group of individuals of unique and varied perspectives. I would like to properly welcome the athletic director and head coach of the women's basketball team, Thomas Shirley, psychologist and professor, Dr. Jenna Rieder, and assistant coach of the men's golf team, Nick Nguyen. To start, I would love to go around the panel and just tell us one way that COVID has seriously affected you, whether it be sports, work, scheduling, stress, or anything else that has come up since the pandemic began. I can actually start with myself just to, just to get the ball rolling. So this pandemic started with me and my team being in New York for our regional championship. We were actually practicing when we found out that we were not going to have a game tomorrow and that we will be going home as a result of the pandemic. We were sent home from school and pretty much like had a short end to our college year, and things just weren't going well. We all suffered the same like pandemic, quarantine, and all things like that. But we were able to come back and try to have another season that also did not go on as a result of the pandemic, and just wanted like to ensure like the safety of, our athletes and stuff. But we're trudging along, and I'll be here next year. Nick?
Yeah, so obviously, I think the biggest thing for me is just the overall idea of work and how it's all, whether it's sports for me, whether it's sports, work, or school, I feel like everything's just been, thrown upside down. And for me, the biggest thing is just being able to, acclimate myself, to adapt and kind of go with the flow of whatever's going to happen, because it seems like everything's very uncertain. And I think that's just the biggest thing with my outlook from the beginning of this, is just being unsure and being more comfortable in that. So I think that's my biggest takeaway from the last year.
Coach?
I think the biggest thing that happened, and as Sabria said, it started last March, was I think everyone's lifestyle, whether you had a fast one, a slow one, a medium one, was really ground to a halt. And I think everyone had to reinvent themselves in some way. Those that go 100 miles an hour and were slowed down to 20 had to figure out what to do with themselves. Those that were going 60 and had the same problem, and those that were going 20 probably really did nothing after that. So I think that was the first adjustment we all had to make. And I kind of mirror it with retirement. Like if you announce your retirement 2 years from now, you kind of wind yourself down slowly to get to retirement. But in this, it was a screeching halt. And really, I think we all looked around from our homes and said, where are we? What are we going to do? And how are we going to get back to whatever our level of normalcy is? So I think that was the first problem that COVID brought to the table.
Coach Nguyen?
Yeah, kind of piggybacking off of what Coach said, the biggest thing that I learned or took away from the kids on my team was just adapting, like Nick said, to the ever-changing environment. Certain things could change in the snap of a finger or the blink of an eye. You could be headed to an away event, and one email or one text notification of one possible positive test that could just slip up everything. So like Coach adhered to, and Nick also adhered to, you have to be able to adapt, and you have to be able to evolve in this environment, especially not only, in athletics, but also in the classroom. I know a lot of people of our student athletes had to learn the ins and outs of, school from home. And some things go better than others, but some things go worse than others. And it's tough, I know, on my student athletes, because they don't necessarily like attending classes in their home and like environment, because they never really get out of their house. And like Coach alluded to, getting out of that, going from 20 miles an hour to 0 miles an hour so quickly had a big impact on our student athletes. And I think now we're finally getting used to it, getting semi back to normal, but also getting used to like the virtual environment and getting comfortable with it.
Dr. Rieder?
Definitely agree that it's been a year of having to adapt to a number of new challenges and kind of having to learn new skills. I think the first thing I really had to learn as an instructor was how to prepare courses for an online modality. Essentially, spring break last year was just a week of me trying to take all of my course content and record like video lectures that I could put online, kind of going through syllabi and looking at changes. This has also affected the way that we do research at universities. It's, affected professors, including my research, and it's also affected student research projects. So we've kind of had to think about ways that we could use the online environment to examine kind of research questions that we might have examined in a more in-person context.
I can ask a question of Sabria and then go to Coach Shirley. You were going to play for a championship or on your way to a possible championship. And then it stopped. I'm just interested in how you felt about that and how it affected you and your teammates.
Sabria?
I'm sorry, I'm trying to like figure out what's going on right now. Could you?
Okay, go ahead,
I
Tom.
couldn't hear. My Wi-Fi is just doing something.
I'll go first to give you a chance here. So we actually just had won the championship of our league the week before. So it was the following Thursday, we're on our way to the NCAA tournament, which if you're an athlete, that's the creme de la creme. So we were pretty excited about that. But you just felt this kind of cloud over your head on the way up in the bus. And I think there was an element of maybe fear on the part of the players, like, what are we actually driving into? And then when we got up to the shoot around, there's 8 other teams up there. And we had literally checked into our hotel. We're in the bus. We're driving over to just have an hour shoot around. And the athletic director from Adelphi University came up to me and said, Kansas and Duke just dropped out of the NCAA tournament. I'm not sure you'll get out of the gym before they're going to cancel everything. And by the time we finished our hour and got back in the locker room, and actually at that point in time, our kids didn't have social media access because they had been out on the court. And when I told them, I think everybody was really disappointed, but I think maybe there was an element of relief because we have this illness around us and we don't know anything about it. So it was one of those deals where, okay, guess we're safe from playing basketball, but now we got to get home and figure out what we're doing when we get home. So I think it was a little bit of fear, a little bit of excitement, and a little bit of sadness mixed into about 3 hours.
And while you're talking, Tom, just you worked a long time to get where you were.
Since
Okay?
Labor Day, and this was March 12th.
And
Yep.
a lot of hours, and it was taken from you. And I'm just interested in how, you reacted before we get into the players' reaction.
Well, it's funny. When we won the league championship the week before, we had such a terrific weekend because we beat University of Sciences at their gym, and then we beat Holy Family. So we won the Philadelphia battle, if you will. And the games were we played maybe as well as we could play on Saturday, and we had a great come from behind win. So I think the excitement and the exuberation from the weekend before was still with us. And I think the first thing that I did was look back and say, I'm so thankful that this didn't happen a week earlier. And we missed out on that opportunity because for us, doing that was just tremendous. So I think I went into administrator mode and got out of coach mode when I found out up there because, okay, I got to get these kids together. I got to tell them, I got to give them a safe feeling. I got to maybe give them a few more laughs before we go home and get serious with the virus. So I think I had a gamut of emotions, but probably the most emotion I had was protector, making sure that the kids were okay.
Sabria?
I agree with everything like Coach just said, like from all the emotions, like being like disappointed and then like relieved. And I feel like my biggest thing was like struggling with the unknown, like not knowing like whether or not we were going to continue to play because we're literally like practicing, but there's people whispering like, over by like the score table. So like what's actually going on? I think it was just like, it was just different. It was just a different experience because we definitely did just come off of like winning the championship. So we were excited to play, like we were excited to be there, like happy to just be like in that space and just like not knowing whether or not like we were even going to be able to like continue that energy and like, keep going up was like just a little, not really nerve wracking, but just like uneasy just because we didn't really like know what was going to go on, but we just like, kept our hopes up. And in the end, like we were relieved with the results because this was new to us. And you're telling us that people are dying from this and all we want to do is play basketball. Like we don't want to die. Like, so it was just like, it was just a bunch of mixed like experiences that all, came down to a decision that was made for the best for everyone. So, yes.
Coach Nguyen?
Yeah, the one thing I could add to what Sabria and Coach Shirley, alluded to was that they their folks got to play, their student athletes got to play at least a portion of their season. I think the biggest disappointment and sadness that Coach mentioned that I and my head coach dealt with during this like March 12th to 17th range of dates, third week of March, that we won't soon ever forget, was telling my my players that you're probably not going to be able to play again this season. And I had one senior who was the captain of my team. He was a fifth-year senior and still a good friend to this day. That it was kind of heartbreaking to tell him that, like, hey, you know, you're not going to be able to finish your senior season, let alone even step foot on the golf course in the spring. So I think coping with those emotions was tough at the beginning, but once we came to grips with, hey, you know, we're taking the whole nation and, in a sense, our whole world's health over, you know, playing a sport, which is a quite wise decision. And once we came to grips with that, I think that everybody could be on board with the decision to kind of set everything else aside and let's focus on protecting our nation and moving forward and learning more about this.
Nick?
Yeah, I mean, just like what Coach Nick said there, I think the biggest thing was, you know, that maturity, and there was a certain level of maturity, I guess is the best word for it, just of being able to, you know, put aside the stuff we worked for. Because I remember our team it was a very warm winter last year. So I remember we were out on the golf course. It must have been every day from January to March 12th. I mean, I remember the day before everything got canceled, we were on the golf course, I think 5 of us. And we had this crazy idea in our mind where we were going to get to like go to online school and play golf all semester. And obviously that didn't work out at all. And I mean, I don't even know where we got the idea from, but it seemed like that was the route it was going. And, you know, when March 12th came, class got canceled and it was still like, hey, like maybe we'll play. And then the next day, I remember that Friday, all the news came out, our conference canceled, our school canceled. And that was just tough news to hear after all that preparation we put in. And, you know, after, like Nick said, with having one teammate who was done for good, he had no opportunity to come back and play more. It was just very tough, but to be able to grow beyond that, you know, talking to your teammates, I think that's the biggest thing we can take from all this is that, you know, you have those guys there by your side, you have your teammates, your friends, and, you know, still understanding that you can get past where you're at for the greater good is the most important thing.
Professor Rieder, I understand you've done some study on the effect of COVID, on the psychological effect of COVID. I'd be interested in your analysis of what you've heard and what your research is starting to show.
Sure. So the study about undergraduate student stress during COVID is actually ongoing. It's a longitudinal study to look at how student stressors kind of change and evolve over the course of the semester, so that we can kind of identify different pathways or trajectories, if you would, of experience. And we kind of want to understand what helps a given student follow maybe a more adaptive trajectory where stress kind of diminishes over time versus students for whom stressors might become compounded, they might get worse, and we might see a profile of, you know, less adaptive coping mechanisms. So I can't really say too much about the results yet, because since the study is ongoing and it is being taken by students at Jefferson, I wouldn't want to potentially influence those results. Mm-hmm. But we definitely have a lot of very rich data so far. You know, and as we suspected, there is so much variability in what people's experiences have been. And really trying to kind of parse apart those different experiences and understand what students are most vulnerable and maybe need the most support, you know, I think is one of the critical goals of that project.
I can, not being part of the study, I can tell you what I've seen in students, and I'd be interested in everyone's reaction to that. And my own experience 100 years ago, when I went home in the summer after being away, I went away to school. It was not an easy time, and I had a good relationship with my parents. But being home after having independence and going and doing as I wanted, my parents, although I understand now, in good intentions, would ask, where are you going? What are you doing? What's, you know, that type of thing. And that didn't go well with me. And I noticed in a number of students, that's not going well from what I've talked to them. The other thing I've noticed is that a lot of them in their bedroom, when they're doing work in class with me, and they're laying on their bed or just lounging. And I think that's a terrible situation too, because the room should be your place of refuge and peace, not where you do work. I think confusing that is leading to a lot of stress. So that's what I've seen, and the inability to just go out and party, which is part of being a young adult, has been taken away. Those who do are having a lot of guilt and anxiety about doing it. So just throwing those things out and wondering, what you've seen, the students and the coaches, and of course, Dr. Rieder, which you've seen as well, apart from the study, of course. Nick?
Yeah, this is something we've talked about. We especially talked to Coach Shirley about it the other day in his interview. And it's this idea of, like you said, about the guilt of the people who do. And I think that's something important to think about, because with the athletics here at Jefferson, there's been an added responsibility on athletes. With the we have testing protocol, and we have COVID forms we fill out every day. And I think that's I'm trying to work around how to think about it, but it's like there's a growing responsibility for athletes to not only be good members of society and, do what's best for the country and everything, and, for the nation as we move through this whole thing, but there's an even greater benefit, like, first term benefit or like immediate benefit to behave for the sake of your teammates. And some teams haven't, or not teams, but, some individuals still go out, still party, and it's other people that pay the price and not always them. And I think that's become even more immediate just with the COVID testing protocols that we have with athletics. So I think that was an interesting point.
Coach Tom?
Excuse me, when we were speaking last November, December, later in the summer about what we're going to do this academic year, obviously we wound up canceling the fall, but as it got closer to the holiday season, I met with Dr. Klasko a couple of times and Jeff Cromartie, and one of the discussions was if we're able to play, we need to play. And Dr. Klasko asked the question, why? And I said, if we shut this down and have the ability to play at some level, I think it's going to really crush the students, especially the student athletes. Even shutting down the fitness center is going to hurt the students. But if we ask them for a joint partnership where they are protective and we are protective of them, then if we fail, at least we fail together. We don't fail by ourselves. And I think that's part of adulthood, is to try to give them a chance. And most of the teams, if not all of them, have had some level of a shutdown for 10 days where you just stop on a Monday because there's a positive test and you don't come back till Wednesday. So I think we've learned as a department and as a university with the student athletes to, do what you need to do to be COVID protected, play your sport, maybe to a lesser degree in terms of number of contests. But I think, as opposed to the student you're seeing sit in their room, I think we're seeing some growth from our student athletes about, as Nick said, sharing in responsibility of let's protect each other, let's protect us, and let's play the games. And I think that has been a positive thing for athletics, in my opinion.
Coach Nguyen?
Yeah, and it's sort of interesting to see how our student athletes and athletic department at Jefferson's kind of acted as like a microcosm for our nation as a whole. So like at first, back in March and April of last year, we kind of got our arms around how we can be most protective, shutting down all non-essential businesses, wearing masks, wearing gloves, cleaning off your groceries even. And come the fall, like Coach Shirley said, we had to come to grips and decide like what are we going to do as an athletic department to mitigate our risks, to get our student athletes on the field and on the court or on the golf course. And I think one of the things that we had agreed upon both at the athletic department level and at the team level is you got to put your team first in order for this to be successful, and you to get, you to be on the course, you to be on the field, you to be on the court. You have to put your team first. You have to use that mentality whenever you are making decisions, when you're going out in public, as it pertains to wearing a mask, socially distancing yourself between others, and seeing others even, which may be difficult because, I know the first time I was able to even hug my grandmother in the past like 16 months was after I got my second dose of my vaccine a couple weeks prior. And it's tough to come to grips with these things because there was really no end in sight in the fall and winter. And one of the things that we had to agree upon was like Nick and Coach said, was putting the team first in all decisions that you make.
Dr. Rieder, looking at the stressors that I've mentioned, how are these handled by the younger adult as opposed to someone my age or not as old, whatever?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the developmental considerations here are massive. As you said, what a person between the ages of 18 and lower 20s, like 22, 23, is normally doing is kind of gaining this independence from their family of origin, learning about their values as a person through socialization with peers, and really establishing friendships that will kind of be enduring. People tend to make more friends than ever during emerging adulthood. It's much harder to make friends later. So the kind of social imperative of these years is really important. Add to that, not only is there this normative developmental pattern where the person is kind of establishing some independence from their family, you also have the added concern that some people's families are not as supportive and loving as we would hope for all of our students. And that makes this even more challenging when students are trying to deal with various stressors in their lives and they're not being supported by people around them.
It's a good point. There are people who will be listening to this who are not as into sports as some of us are on this panel, and may say, okay, so big deal, you're not playing basketball, big deal, you're not playing soccer or golf or whatever it may be. How do you address that? How can you tell people listening just how important this experience is, Nick?
Yeah, when we first started, that was, I guess, kind of my first concern really, was I didn't want to make it seem like this was somehow beyond other problems in the world right now. Obviously, there's a lot going on. Everybody's very affected by this issue. But I think the biggest thing that Sabria and I talked about is how closely, student athletes tie their sport to their personality, to who they are as a person, to how they get their values, and to how they've grown up. I mean, I know for myself, I didn't start playing golf till I was like later in high school. But once I learned it, it's changed my life for, so many reasons. It's where I work. It's what I do in my free time. It's what I do with my friends. It's how I meet half the people that are some of my best friends now is because of golf. And so it's not just about the sport itself, but how closely that ties into pretty much every intrinsic value in somebody's life. And just like any other, hobby or activity that somebody truly values, it is that important.
Sabria?
I couldn't have said it any better than Nick, but in my own way, like I feel like not having basketball this year affected me was like I had to make my own schedule. Like since I've been playing basketball, my life has revolved around basketball, and I make my schedule and things that I want to do around that schedule that's set for me. So being as though this year, like I had so much time on my hands and just so much availability, it's just like, well, what do I do with it? Like, where do I go? Like, do I do homework? Like, I just felt like lost. I didn't it just felt weird to just have so much time on my hands because I'm usually tired after lift, or I'm usually tired after practice, or I need to take this nap really quick in between, like, just a little workout. I don't know, like just some things. And it was just weird. So I feel like I struggled definitely like putting myself on a schedule and getting myself like motivated for certain things because I was usually just like, I didn't have this time. So when I did have the time, I just had to get the things done. But so I had all the time. It's like, what do you do with this? So my biggest thing was like trying to figure out how to live like life without basketball. And it really was an eye opener for me, being as though that I'll be like, actually without basketball and, soon. So I'll have to make my own schedule and figure out how to, get myself on my everyday routine and without basketball. So it was really an eye opener, like, ooh, adulthood, it's here. So
Coach Shirley?
Yeah, I think for someone that asked, like, is it a big deal that you lost your sport? I would probably say, we have 2,500 students on campus, but we have 350 athletes. And those 350 athletes, if they renamed their department, they might rename it the Department of Fun or the Department of Social Engagement. And I think when anybody loses their fun or anybody loses their social engagement, there's got to be some level of drop off in their personality, I would think. So for these 350 kids, I think it was a traumatic experience, especially highlighting what Sabria said, where they're going to school. In her case, she's with me playing basketball, and then she's got a few hours to do what she wants. So to have to fill that void, a round of golf is 4 hours. To fill that void is really, really challenging. And and sad for the people that have grown up for that since they were young kids. So I think I would say to those people, take the cool, fun things out of your life that you like to do, and you'll have an appreciation for what these athletes lost.
Coach Nguyen?
Yeah, Coach Shirley kind of took the words out of my mouth there. The only thing that I could add to what he said was, like you mentioned earlier, Professor Lane, the like your bedroom kind of being your sanctuary. A lot of times at the collegiate level in sports, what we find with student athletes is going on the golf course and just practicing or playing golf or going to the basketball court and getting some shots up eases their mind. And not having that specifically for student athletes, can really be jarring at first. And it would be similar like to somebody who during the pandemic had picked up something that they really liked, or prior to the pandemic had something that they really liked doing, whether it's like weightlifting or going and doing some kind of class with other people. And when the pandemic started, you weren't able to do that. So you picked up other things, whether it was doing yoga or working out at home or baking at home. You picked out other things to try and, have that fun that Coach talked about. And a lot of times that fun and social engagement for student athletes comes at that sport that you do and you love and you play at the collegiate level. So taking that away from our student athletes was definitely difficult at first. And I think that was a big part in why we wanted to get back to playing sports so badly.
Dr. Rieder?
I just wanted to add, with regard to sports, I think what your average person who's not interested in sports at all might think is, well, what's the big deal? You can just go back to doing this once the pandemic ends. Like, it's just a couple months of not doing this. But what people really have to keep in mind is that there are specific time-sensitive opportunities. That could mean like a person's last year or last semester of playing that now they won't have the opportunity to complete. It could be that somebody is missing out on their transition year when they would normally be getting to college, making friends and becoming very close, often, I would imagine with teammates. And these kind of really time-sensitive events being interrupted is something that I think we have to keep in mind when understanding the unique challenges that student athletes are facing.
Coach Shirley?
Especially, and I want to add one more thing. The other thing is the trickle-down effect that people don't appreciate. This would have been Sabria and Allie Warren's last year playing basketball. The NCAA has granted them an additional year of eligibility. So Sabria and Allie will come back and get in graduate programs. But that's two less high school seniors that I recruited to my program. So now you have that trickle-down effect to the high school class of 21, who, because of Sabria and Allie, and it's not their fault, sticking around, there's two kids that are not going to get a scholarship of some sort to play basketball. So, and then you're dealing with a 17-year-old with a lesser maturity level, I would assume, than a 21-year-old Sabria. And they have to deal with that now, what is historically never happened before, and the dissatisfaction or the unhappiness that comes with that. So this is not just a collegiate problem or an older person or a my age problem. This is even a kid problem in terms of just their whole future is interrupted over this.
Dr. Rieder?
Oh, sorry, I meant to take my hand down.
Okay, it's an old hand, as we call it in our classes. I just want to bring up one other topic. I'll throw it to the students for their questions. I remember when this happened in March. We were coming back from my daughter's house, and suddenly we heard everything was closing down, and the panic that we felt, and we ran to Aldi's supermarket, and Aldi's was closed, and I didn't know if we're going to have food. I didn't know, and we know a lot more about the virus than we knew before, but touching anything or the fear. And I just wanted to try to get the students' point of view. What was the level? Because Sabria was talking about that you didn't want to die playing basketball. What was the fear, and how did that affect you at that time? And I'll start with Nick and go to Sabria.
Yeah, obviously we were very unsure of everything, and you hinted at that a lot. And I think the thing I always think back to is just how much we didn't know. I mean, the stuff we were thinking a year ago, now it almost seems insane to think that that was our first thought. You know, people were wiping down groceries, and then we have the CDC director saying that it's okay to touch things, that's really not an issue. But so I think it's just like with everything else, it's the uncertainty. I mean, I remember sitting on my couch here at my house in Philly, and I was, watching, I think we were watching like basketball or something that night. It was the Wednesday night before the 12th. So it was the 11th and everything got canceled. That was the first stuff to get canceled. And I guess it kind of just all hit us because I remember, my roommates and I had talked about it, had talked about how this was a thing going on, over in China, in other countries. It was, there were a few cases in the United States, but it seemed like that stuff happens before. And then all of a sudden it was to the point where they canceled an NBA game. And I guess that brought it all to, the stark reality of what was to come. And then it just seemed like a domino effect from there. And so I think that was the scariest time, was when we really had no clue what was coming. I mean, we had the economic crash of like a day, which seemed like, everybody was so unsure if anything would even stand after that. So I think just that week was probably one of the scariest weeks to have, just because it seemed like the stuff that was happening was not going to stop. It seemed like we were going to lose everything at some point. And there was really just no clue as to when it would get better.
Sabria?
I feel like the pandemic triggered my anxiety like more than anything else has ever like triggered my anxiety, because as soon as when we found out like, oh, like this virus is killing people, oh, you can get it through touch, oh, it's transmitted through the air, it's this, it's that, and like when things were changing like all the time, and there was just like, still like the unknown, like how you actually like, get it, or what can you touch, what can't you touch, like, how should you interact, like just different things. I feel like the biggest thing was like, if we're going to play basketball and then we introduced basketball with a mask, I was like, I actually cannot breathe without the mask. So putting the mask on will now like make things just a lot harder. But it was just scary because it's just like, now we're starting to like, put in lack of oxygen into like the bodies. Now my body is like overheating and shutting down more. It's just like, how do I play through this? Like it made things like just like harder a little bit. Like just from like a mental standpoint, and just being confident in being like a basketball player, just because like I just don't know what's going on with the world right now. So it was just scary, just not knowing what was going to happen and if I was safe or not. So
I throw it over to you and Nick for your questions that you have as well. Nick?
Yeah, so I think a big thing that we talked about with a lot of student athletes that we spoke with, and obviously it's for everybody to answer, but with the students and with student athletes alike, how is the difficulty of staying motivated and continuing to work hard when you really have no clue of what's coming? I mean, for most teams, even the spring season, nobody, you were supposed to be practicing, but you weren't sure if there was going to be a season. For the basketball team, as Sabria and I talked about, there was a season and then it got opted out of. So how is it possible to stay motivated both in schoolwork and also in practices and in your sport during these uncertain times?
Coach Nguyen.
Yeah, I'll take a stab at that, especially the first or the second part of that question, Nick. So one of the big things that we tell all of our student athletes upon stepping foot in, or even putting a pen to a dotted paper to become a Jefferson student athlete, is that at Jefferson, you're a student first and you're an athlete second. So in the interim of our times of, like Nick said, unknown, and if we're going to have a season, if we're not going to have a season, one of the things that we stressed was put your nose in the books. Take this time to make sure that you have all your I's dotted and your T's crossed with every single one of your courses, and to be sure that you're on top of things, because if we do have a season, you're going to have to be quick on your feet again and telling your professors, hey, professors, we are going forward with the spring season. These are the dates that I do have my events on. If you can and will excuse me, it would be appreciated. So we wanted to give that time to our student athletes to really, grind and paying attention and to their schoolwork and their coursework, because when that time does come up, and it did come up in the spring, so that you can be ready and be prepared and on top of things to play your sport and continue to have success in the classroom.
Coach Shirley?
Yeah, Nick, I'll answer that with kind of statistically. One of the decisions that we made last fall was we knew we were not going to have seasons for anybody, and practice was minimal and maybe going to grow a little bit as the semester went on. And we gave everybody the opportunity to opt out, especially if you were on an athletic scholarship and you felt unsafe, you weren't happy with the situation, you wanted to just go concentrate on your schoolwork or stay home, whatever the case is. At that time, we had 353 student athletes and three opted out. So I think when you look at the math on that, everybody wanted to play, whether play meant practice or play meant conditioning or play meant actually putting a stick in your hand or a ball in your hand. Everybody wanted to do something. I think the competition was probably missed, but at least the physical activity and the sweating and the social engagement was still there. And I think that, to me, was the motivation that had only 3 people opt out.
Nick, further question?
Our next question that we want to propose would be pretty much, is there something valuable that, I guess not just student athletes, but that we all can take from our experiences through the pandemic moving forward? In almost all of the interviews that we pretty much conducted, we talked about how COVID has been one of the most adverse things that anyone on this planet, like who's currently here right now, and I guess even not here, have dealt with. It's just something that none of us have ever experienced, and it's a learning experience for everyone, not just the medical professionals or the people who work at the grocery store. Like, this is new to everyone, and we all have to adjust. So what is something valuable that I guess you could take from your experiences, moving forward? I guess we can start with Dr. Ryder.
Coach Todd?
Yeah, I think the one thing, I think everybody learned something. I think I learned that I probably didn't have to run as fast as I was always running from a work perspective. And I think the other thing I learned was the technology of Zoom has probably changed the world forever. I mean, I think companies will cut back on expenses by doing Zoom calls. I think educational modules will be sent out through Zoom links. So I think we all learned, maybe in a way, to slow down our lives a little bit through Zoom. And I think with so much time on your hands and still able to do your job, quote unquote, working at home, I think I learned you don't have to go 150 miles an hour. You can get it done going 90 miles an hour if you work effectively.
Dr. Ryder?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to lower my hand before I forget. I agree with this notion that we are kind of realizing that we can do more than we maybe thought possible online. And I think that has important implications, especially for particular people, like, for example, people with physical disabilities, for whom working from home might be a much better option. That could also include students with physical disabilities, even though we have, some degree of accommodations on campus, something about getting to class might be difficult. And I think there is more understanding maybe now than in the past about what those challenges might be. Beyond physical disabilities, there are also some kinds of learning differences that might actually make that kind of environment more suitable. For other learning differences, it might make it worse. But for some, being able to do things online might be helpful. And again, I think that's something that we will consider now, whereas in the past, we kind of thought, oh, well, we can't do anything online. That can't be an option.
Coach Nguyen?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest realizations I had throughout the course of this pandemic is the effects of media and social media on not only kids, my age and the upper 25 to 30s even range, but also on my student athletes. I think the conflicting reports that we've gotten in media from the beginning of this, even from the jump of the pandemic all the way through to even now, has really caused everybody in my life to have more apprehension and more anxiety towards the situation as a whole. So the one thing that I kind of took away from this is let the experts do their thing, and then whenever a report or whatever comes out that's scientifically and factually based, then we'll use that as the fundamental basis of our decision making and things like that. So things we see on media and social media can point you in 25 different directions every single day, and you can find almost an article to support any frame or of beliefs that you may have. And I think that throughout the course of this pandemic, that I really learned the harmful effects of media and social media.
Coach Shirley?
Yeah, I just wanted a couple of things I think that are going to be interesting for college graduates is, before, if you took a job in Arizona, historically you moved to Arizona for your job. Now your home office can be in Arizona, but you can still live in Center City. So I think that's going to really affect the decision-making of young people when they look for a job. I think the other thing too is I think it's going to affect relationships. If you're in a geographically challenged relationship, one person normally moves to the other person because you want to see each other all the time. You might be able to kind of coexist in different environments just from the strength of technology, at least for a while. So I think that's going to matter. And the other thing, I think it's going to make people rethink their careers. And I'm not picking on nurses because nurses are the salt of the earth, but do I really want to have a job where I have to physically be there 12 hours a day, 3 days a week, where I could find another job where I could stay at home in my pajamas and I could do my job through technology? So there might be a rethinking of young careers in terms of with the availability of technology and the work-life balance that I'd like to try to have with my partner and my children. It may be hard moving forward to fill jobs that require physical presence.
I just may add my own observation. I think it's also shown the difference, lack of equality in our country. I can just point to my own granddaughter who's lucky enough to have her own desk in her own office, sitting next to her father who's also working from home. And it's actually been a very positive experience working with a good computer with good Wi-Fi. But how many students have that? How many kindergartners have that? And how many people, I have students, there are kids running in the background, the mother's yelling, and not everyone has their own office, has their own place. And I think it's demonstrated how the terrible inequality in this country will affect education. Dr. Rieder?
Yeah, added to that point, there was a recent article that came out this year about health disparities in COVID, particularly the increased COVID mortality in Black and African American communities. And they were testing different mediators, like things that accounted for that or kind of explained that relationship. And one of the factors that emerged among the health disparities that I thought was interesting was like availability of Wi-Fi actually predicted within different jurisdictions, like at I think it was like the town level. That was actually a predictor that accounted for some health disparities. So the authors kind of interpreted that a couple different ways. One way is what you said, that it affects a person's ability to participate in their usual functions, but it also can affect the person's access to like updated current information, the current guidelines, et cetera. So I just thought that was kind of interesting and striking and reminds us that even something that seems subtle can actually be contributing to some of these massive health disparities.
We are running to the end of our hour. So Nick and Sabria, one more question.
Yeah, I guess most importantly, as we look forward to the hopeful end of this, I guess, we're expecting a return to normal. I know Jefferson has said might be a new normal for a little bit before we return to a real normal. But, within that, do you think there will be a return to, I guess, almost sanity as student athletes and students return to the classrooms, return to the field full time, can, perform on normal schedules? Or do you think there will be some long lasting effects of the last year just on the effects of stress levels and like anxiety of student athletes?
Well, I'll take that, Nick. I think there's a couple things there. I think as I start looking at and talking to coaches who are recruiting, there seems to be a groundswell of student athletes, high school student athletes, whose parents want them closer to home. So I think you're going to start seeing that, idea of maybe 1 hour from home is fine, but I want to keep an eye on him or her just because I don't know what's coming in the future. I think the other thing is, from an institutional standpoint, is you still need to make the money that you need to run the institution. So I think there's got to be a careful watch over how liberal do we get with getting back to normal before it's really there for the price of the almighty dollar. Like, maybe we shouldn't be opening the dorms. Maybe cafeterias should still be eat by yourself. Maybe the fitness center should still be 17 students instead of 62. So I think we have to be careful about those that are fighting for economic survival and make their policies more liberal than they should really be. Like right now, we're in the midst of a return spike, but you don't hear much about the return spike. So how does one behave in that situation? So I think you have to be careful with health and welfare and the reality that this business or that business has lost a lot of money over the last year, and we got to make it up quickly.
Sabria, I'd just be interested in what you think is going to be waiting for you if you come back next fall. Do you think it's going to be different?
I'll be here, Sabria.
I mean, hopefully, I submitted my application to the MBA program. I'm just waiting to hear back for an acceptance. So if I'm accepted, I will be here guaranteed. So I am looking forward to next year. One thing about COVID, I do like, through all like the negatives of it, I do feel like I still came out on top. I feel like I'm getting an opportunity that was like I never even thought of before, and now like it's right before my eyes, and I'm using it to my advantage. So I feel like through all the negative, like there's still some positive, and that's also one thing I had to learn about myself was just like, like through these times, just calm down, take it one step at a time. Like everything's going to be okay, and everything is okay. I will be returning. I'll be getting a second degree, hopefully, and I'll be able to finish my senior season. Everything, things that I've always, wanted to do. So, in the end, it's just working out for the better.
I think that's a great way to end on a positive note with that big smile and a positive attitude. So thank you everyone for coming. Thank you, Coach Shirley. Thank you, Coach Nguyen. Thank you, Professor Rieder. And thanks to the two students who organized this. I'm looking very forward to your website and your presentations on your findings. Any comments, Nick, you want to make before we go on?
I just want to thank everyone for participating. I want to thank everyone for coming tonight and for listening to this. And it was great to be able to talk to everyone and have this, full conversation about this topic that we're on.
Thank you.
Both did a very good job. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye
Also,
now.
I want to say thank you everyone for coming as well. And, it means a lot to us. We really didn't think people were going to come, but my heart is filled, and thank you so much.
I love the positive. We'll end with that extremely positive note. Good night, everybody.
Thank you. Have a good night. Bye-bye.